to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This workshop meeting of the Township Council is being held in accordance with the meetings of the Township Council established and adopted by Township Council, which schedule designate the time, date, and place of this meeting. Adequate public notice of this meeting has been provided pursuant to the provisions of the Open Public Meetings Act. We are using a electronic amplifying and recording device in order to obtain a clear and audible record, and we request all those wishing to speak to be recognized and state your name and address directly to the microphone. The recording device will be still utilized by the Township Clerk's Office for the preparation of minutes and shall be the official record of the Township Council meetings. Madam Clerk, can I have a roll call, please?
Present.
Here. Mr.
Here.
She's running late.
Here. Mr. Mercado?
Present.
Mr. Carlemere?
Here.
Mr. Davis?
Here.
Mr. Wagner? Mr. Murphy? Mr. Caldwell?
Here.
We'll now open up our public portion for our workshop. Anyone wishing to speak, please raise your hand. Mr. Krug?
Evening, Council. Paul Krug, Blackwood
Good
Estates.
evening.
Would you mind if I remove my mask while I speak? Thank you.
Mr. Krug, there may be people that may feel uncomfortable with you having your mask off and in front of a microphone there. So I'm going to ask you to keep your mask on.
I do have both vaccinations, just FYI. If we go back to the council meeting on March 22nd, you'll recall that Denise, a citizen who's often taken interest in the concerns of the township, brought up a land deal, which I'll run through the chronology of, if you don't mind. But what interested me in her topic was the inability for township solicitor and township administrator to provide answers to the questions which not only arose out of that meeting, but had been submitted for 2 to 3 months prior through eGov emails. And what this is in reference to is the agreement that dates back to 2006 through 2008, when Gloucester Township Housing Authority signed and then had a deed drawn up for ownership of 15 acres from Camden County at a price of $600,000, which was supposed to be used to construct a minimum of 300 new low to median income units for seniors. During that 2006 to 8 timeframe, the other important point to note is that Lot 1, Block 10301, was subdivided into one 5-acre lot and one 10-acre lot. In 2010, the 5-acre lot was made into Senior Campus 1, a 75-unit affordable senior apartment complex on the 5 acres. In the middle of 2012, the Housing Authority signed an agreement with Gloucester Township to sell the 10-acre vacant lot for $734,712. The money that was used for that purchase came from the Housing Trust Fund to the tune of $666,759 from the trust, and COA funds, $67,952. The agreement stated that the two would coordinate joint efforts to provide affordable senior housing at the site. Then in February of 2020, you all approved an ordinance allowing family housing, non-age restricted, to be not only permitted, but the preferred use for that redevelopment effort. In January of this year, Gloucester Township Council agreed to sell that property back to the Housing Authority, still vacant, 10 acres, for $872,865. Again, the funds come from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. At the January 11th council meeting, Township Solicitor David Carlemere was the one who presented, saying that they analyzed the appropriateness and everything was fine, but there was no mention that the same 10 acres was purchased back in 2012. And then the following night, Solicitor Carlemere updated GTHA that the council took certain formal action at the council meeting the night before to sell it to the Gloucester Township Housing Authority. Now, Denise brought that up at the March 22nd meeting, followed by an article that came out detailing this chronology. After that, 2 commissioners of the GTHA resigned with unexpired terms. May we better understand the reasons for those resignations?
You would have to speak to those individuals, Mr. Marks and Mr. Wilson, of why they resigned. I can't, no, but you would have to, I can't give you a reason. I'm not aware of why they resigned. I just know that they resigned. And when you reference an article, what article are you referencing?
This was an article on GT Restore.
Oh, is that a news outlet?
It is, yes.
It's a news outlet.
Believe so. I follow it for news for the township.
Like the Courier Post and the Inquirer? Or is it just a blog?
I guess it could be considered a blog as well.
Okay, so it was someone's opinion, and they did some fact finding, they threw it on there. I'm not aware of this. You said it was an article on the RestoreGT.com. Okay. So I couldn't tell you why Mr. Wilson or Mr. Marks resigned.
Okay. Mr. Marks appears to be, the replacement for Mr. Marks appears to be Troy McPherson. Is he related to the chair of the GT Planning Board, Andrea McPherson?
Yes, he is.
Okay.
Council President, Mr. Carlemere can explain real quick why those 2 individuals.
Oh, if he's aware of it, that's fine.
Someone's appointed to the Housing Authority, all
Can't hear.
staff in New Jersey mandate that they complete a certain number of credits, whether it's 5 or 15, I'm not sure. They have 18 months or so to use them, but they refuse to extend. Neither of those 2 completed were mandated to force requirements by the state of New Jersey. If they didn't resign, this council would remove them because they were mandated by statute to continue as housing authority members without completing courses in the development. Probably reason why they couldn't do it, whatever, but they did not complete those courses, so they were going to have to resign.
Okay.
Thank you,
Understood.
Mr. Carlemere.
Thank you. With regard to the piece of land and the deed restriction, let's say I owned a piece of land and with the deed restriction and wanted it subdivided. Does the deed restriction still pertain to both pieces of land, similar to the 5-acre and the 10-acre in this instance?
Mr. Carlemere, can you answer that?
Deed restriction reported, yes. If there's not a deed restriction, but there's an agreement, and it's an agreement between the parties. But if you're calling a deed restriction, it's a deed restriction applies to the deed.
So then, why is the same restriction not applied to the Lakeland 10-acre property?
I don't know if there's a deed restriction. I don't think there was a deed restriction on that 10 acres. When the county transferred it over to the housing authority, the consideration was $1. And they were going to do it. And they completed the first phase,
Understood. Has this representative body conducted any sort of investigation steps since Denise has brought this situation up as far as the property being sold to Gloucester Township using Housing Administration Trust Fund, and then Gloucester Township selling it back to the Housing Authority using trust fund money?
No.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Ms. Coyne?
Mr. Carlmeyer, I recently sent in an Oprah request to the
Ms.
House.
Coyne, can you forward your questions here, then I'll forward Mr. Carlemere?
Sure.
Thank you.
I recently sent an Oprah request in to the Housing Authority asking for the certifications saying whether or not the board members, commissioners had completed their required courses. And I was told that due to COVID, that it had been extended and that requirement wasn't applicable because of COVID.
That's not my.
Mr. Carlemere, is that something you can answer?
I can't answer what the housing authority or person told me. I can only answer what I believe to be the facts. And I know that they were resigning because they did not complete their courses. And I don't want to speak for the individuals who don't misinterpret this, but they might not have wanted to take those courses in the future. So they have to, whether there was an extension because of COVID at that time, I'm not
Well, this is essentially a month ago, I believe, and it was the attorney for the Housing Authority that gave me that information.
And the reason is they probably did not want to continue taking those courses in the future.
Okay, as far as the deed, I also Oprah'd that, and the deed I got back from the attorney from the Housing Authority is dated January 4th, 2008, and it states, this conveyance is made on condition that the land herein conveyed shall be used only for the purpose of the Gloucester Township Housing Authority, its assignee, to wit, affordable senior housing. In the event the land and building are not used in accordance with the aforesaid limitation, the title shall revert to the County of Camden without any entry, re-entry made thereon on the behalf of Camden County. And that is on page 4 of the deed. So it's in the body of the deed itself. And that was for the 15 acres that was sold from the county to the Gloucester Township Housing Authority.
So if it's a recorded restriction, which I have not seen, you're reading it as part of the deed, then it's a restriction that runs with the land.
I'm sorry, say that again?
It's a restriction that runs with the land.
So it's a restriction that applies to the whole 15 acres, correct?
Whatever happens on that 15 acres, the beneficiary of that restriction can enforce the restriction of what is used for. I will say, when the township took title, there was avenues that the township was exploring, and this is correct, to market the property through, forget the company's name, that was, had sources in tracking the federal government for funding and wanted to develop
Conifer.
So that was the plan that could go through. And then when the township took the title back, they were transferring it to Conifer and assisting them in marketing that property for that development. That fell through. So now, here we are, situated back, and that ground is now part of our fair share housing plan. Before this agreement came into effect to deed it back to and sell it back to the housing authority, township administration checked with our professionals, the law firm and independent attorneys, saying it was appropriate to transfer it back, putting it under their executive director to market it in conjunction with whatever avenues and resources and network they have to develop in our fair share plan, which is waiting to get back before the courts when the courts open up. That ground is part of our fair share plan for veterans, senior housing, or senior housing.
Not family.
Not veterans housing and senior housing. That's how I
Correct.
understand it.
Okay, In doing some research, I found that the 10-acre property had been retitled in 2012, I believe the same day that the agreement was signed. And the deed restriction disappeared. So,
I can't answer.
So that's a deed from the town, or that's the deed from, who's the grantor on that?
the same day that the agreement was signed to sell the property from the housing authority to the township,
So the grantor would be the housing authority.
there was a new deed. Well, I don't know, there's a ton of mortgages totaling $6 million some odd $1,000 on Senior Campus 1 and the 10-acre property. There's like 5 different mortgages, which I'm still trying to figure all that out, totaling over $6 million. Some of them have been canceled and paid off, which I'm wondering how that happened also. I'm wondering if, you know, the taxpayers ended up paying off mortgages on top of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money being used twice to purchase the same property. I don't know where the money came from to pay off these mortgages either. So, you know, it's just astounding to me. Yeah, but the housing authority is a municipal entity.
Housing authority is appointed as independent council appoints the housing authority members of mayor and state of New Jersey as members of the housing authority. Their job is to administer and follow whatever regulations there. So if there's another arm of the investment that manages it, the housing authority manages it, they secure their funding, so I don't know how those mortgages are there and how they're being paid off, and if they apply to this property or not, I don't know. You would ask that question to the housing authority's attorneys or executive director.
Okay, well, when the housing authority, I mean, there's, in the sale agreement, initially, it said that the housing authority could transfer their property to the Gloucester Township Housing Finance Corporation.
That's a finance corporation that was formed by the housing authority many years ago on the advice of their then executive director, on the advice of their then attorney, to my knowledge, that they needed a finance arm as well as a housing authority arm. The finance arm is the mirror image of the housing authority. The same members that are on that housing authority make up the finance arm. They're just two different entities in a sense to meet federal requirements. That's how I understand it.
So the housing authority owns the finance company that owns.
Well, they don't own it, they're independent. The then attorney, years ago, not me or with my advice, the then attorney said, and the then executive director formed the housing authority into the finance board. And then that finance board is a mirror image of the housing authority. And that's how they function going through the funding of housing.
So-
Mr. Crozier, is the Gloucester Township Housing Authority a governmental entity?
The governmental entity was appointed by the council. They're not an independent elected body.
Is it more appropriate that this coin actually go to one of the housing authority meetings and ask these questions to them?
I think when you attend that housing, you've been there, you attend the housing authority meetings, right now they're all by Zoom, some members are there, most of them by Zoom, to my knowledge. But you have access to the executive director, you have access to their attorney, and their advisors sitting there. That's where your questions should go. That's their function, their knowledge. That's how they run the
Oh,
house.
unfortunately, every time I ask questions to them, they don't know and they refer me back to council.
I don't feel comfortable. Denise, I just think that the best answers you're going to get are from the attorney sitting at that table over there. I mean, that's where I think you should get the answers to some of these questions. One of my concerns is this deed restriction that you bring up. If we own the property today, and we convey the property back to the housing authority so that we can do what otherwise seems to be a very good idea, are we giving up the property because we theoretically violate a deed restriction? Because Denise, that's what you think is going to happen, am I right?
Well, it's that among other things. I
But is
mean,
that a concern of yours?
it's a concern of mine that there's a deed restriction on the property initially when it went from the county to the housing authority, which has now disappeared off the deed.
Has anybody violated that deed restriction?
Well, the township was to put family
Once.
non-age restricted. They approved the ordinance to do that.
But you're suggesting that we want to do something, and that desire will violate the deed restriction, correct? Okay. Dave, I think I just heard you say that that's not what the our fair share housing plan calls for. So I think your concern is not what we think is going to happen with that property.
And you
Well-
guys, and keep in mind when the redevelopment entity, which is council. Council said as the redevelopment entity, and they named the housing authority as the redeveloper for that piece of ground. Then you signed an agreement with them as part of that redeveloper agreement. That says that you're to use that property for those restrictions. You're to use that property for senior and veteran senior housing and senior housing. That's what's in the redevelopment agreement that this council approved and adopted and sent to the housing.
Is that going to govern what can be done with that
That's
property?
correct, because that means if they try to sell it to somebody that's not putting that in, they're violating the redevelopment agreement with this governing body.
Okay, good.
The problem with that is Mr. Parlier, when he presented this to the housing authority and to council, both times, stated that it was for veteran, senior, and family affordable housing. That's how it was presented.
Well, it was family affordable housing at one time. It was also, I believe, and I could be mistaken on this, that might have been part of our fair share plan the first time it was approved.
No, that's incorrect. It was just recently approved. It was recently approved to add, I'm not talking about family.
Redevelopment plan is pending in the fourth.
And that contains what desire on this property?
When we talked about transferring this to the housing, we checked with Steve Bach, he's our professional, and transferring it back to veterans, senior housing, and senior housing is in compliance with the plan that we have pending.
Can we just triple check, just to make sure that everything is syncing up and that we're not going to violate a potential deed restriction?
That family affordable housing was recently added.
Okay. We're going to double check, Denise. I think it's a good point you bring up. Is there
Okay.
another point that you got, though?
Yeah, the other point is, I'd like to know how the deed restriction disappeared off the deed when it was redeeded in 2012. That's a big concern.
Is that a concern anymore, though?
Yes,
Why?
because now the township owns the property, and
Okay.
the deed restriction disappeared.
And if I put that, if we deed the property back to the housing authority, what's the problem?
Well, if there was a legal issue
What's
with the
the
deed,
ramifications of this legal issue?
well, to me, it would be, yes. Logically speaking, if there was a deed restriction on the deed originally, and the county sold the land, saying, I'll sell this land only if it's used for this purpose, and the deed restriction disappears, when
Operative
somebody...
word, Denise, is used. It has not been used for anything. Your concern is about future use. It has not been used for anything, and therefore there has been no violation of the deed restriction.
Well, I don't know that.
Well, it has not been used. It's vacant property. It's unimproved.
Okay, but how does a deed restriction disappear? How did that happen?
Denise, if the county has not said that they want this property back, have you been advised by anybody that they're asking for this property to be returned?
How would I know what they want to do?
So what is your question then?
My question is, how does a deed just disappear? How does a deed restriction disappear? If I owned a property that had a deed restriction on it, and I subdivided it, and I went to the county and said, I want a new deed on this property, can I just make the deed restriction disappear?
It sounds like you're looking to create a problem.
I'm not looking to create anything, I'm trying to find facts. Facts that deal with the piece of public property that's being sold, that nobody seems to be able to answer the
Mr.
residents'
Hutchinson, you
questions
can
on.
finish.
Yeah, make sure that there's no issue with the deed restriction.
Did
And then-
appear in a subsequent deed, and I can't answer that without having a look at it. If it did appear in a subsequent deed, doesn't mean it's not enforceable by the beneficiary of that which is being held.
Okay, well, the other problem I have with this, you want to sell the land back to the housing authority, is initially, when the land was sold from the housing authority to the township, it was because the township and the housing authority were gonna work together to put affordable housing. And now you wanna sell it back because the township and the housing authority are gonna work together to put affordable housing there. I mean, how does that make sense? So you're buying and selling the same piece of property using all the money in the affordable housing twice to do the same thing that you initially were supposed to do the first time. Why is it necessary to use all the money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund again to do the same thing that you said you were gonna do the first time for the same piece of property?
Can I ask you, I want to be able to answer this question, but I need information. So, can you walk us through the first transaction, Dave, as best you might recall?
When it was first sold to the housing authority.
Well, before, Dan, I think you're putting him in
I
a
know,
awkward
but
to recollect, because this is years of transactions that have taken place. And what I've asked Ms. Coyne at our last meeting is she has certain questions, to provide those questions ahead of time so we could research it. So I'm seeing a reoccurring theme that each time I see you at a meeting, this is the questions you're gonna ask. So I would ask if you would forward those questions to us beforehand, because there's a lot, you have paperwork and you have transactions that have taken place here, and asking Mr. Carlmer or any person of council to recollect what happened on this specific date or what transaction took place, we need to research that. So that's all I'm asking for. But I think that puts Mr. Carlmer on the spot, Mr. Hutchins. I'm sorry to jump in, but
Sorry about that.
Okay, well, I'm not asking you about details on a certain date. I'm talking about details that deal with the piece of property that's public-owned property that's being sold by township professionals that should have answers to basic questions regarding the transfer of that land. You have access to all these records. I have to beg for them, send an Oprah request for them, and beg and beg and beg to get these documents. It takes me forever to get these documents. Then I have to read through them all, figure them all out. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a business administrator. I mean, you guys should have the answers.
So then he says, you're just concerned, well, I'm sure you got a lot of concerns. The financial concern is the property was sold and it's being resold.
My concern is that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money has been wiped out twice for the
Okay.
same piece of
So,
property.
Okay, your concern is that it was sold, right? And now it's being sold back to that entity. And that money is being used, and you don't think it was used appropriately.
I don't know how it was
Is that
used.
accurate?
I don't know how it was used.
But is that your concern?
My
I
concern,
understand you don't know how it was used, but am I stating what you're looking for?
no, my concern is that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money has been wiped out twice, 2 times,
Well, isn't that what I
to
just said?
buy the same piece of
Isn't that what
property.
I'm saying, Denise? Denise,
But
I'm trying to meet you in the middle. I'm trying to understand what you're looking for so that after tonight, I can hunt it down.
that's what I'm looking for, justification.
That's all it is.
Justification as to how you can spend the Affordable Housing Trust Fund money twice to buy and sell the same piece of property twice to accomplish the same goal.
Okay, I think I understand what you're asking for, and I think that my restatement is pretty accurate. You want to know why it was sold, why it's being sold twice, right? And where is the money and what happened?
And why was the
Was it
Affordable
in-
Housing Trust Fund money used?
Right.
Why
Okay,
was the
good.
Affordable Housing Trust
Well,
Fund money
we should look into
used?
that. That's your concern, we need to get answers to
It
that.
should have been looked into already. This happened in January. We're in March.
Other
I've been
than-
asking questions. I've been sending in Oprah requests. I don't
Other than
understand
it
why
being-
you don't have an answer now.
And other than that question, what other issue do you have with this?
Why I can't get answers.
You sent in Oprah requests, they provide you with information, okay? You're not begging for anything, you simply fill out
You
a
don't
form
think
and
so?
ask for it.
When you send in an Oprah request, can you ask for a document and they only send you back part of what you were supposed to get? And then you have to read the document to find out something's missing? And then you have to try to get the documents that's missing. Do you know how many times that's happened?
No,
Over and over and over again,
I don't.
okay? And then I call and I ask questions and nobody calls me back. And I send emails that go unanswered. So getting information is not easy. It's an exhausting task.
Well, I understand.
So I come here and I ask questions, hoping that I can get an answer from the township representatives that are supposed to represent me, who are lawyers.
So I understand your question, Denise. I do. You've asked 2 questions tonight. I think I've stated them. I'd like to get answers to. Okay?
Okay, well,
We'll follow up on that.
can you tell me why I can't get an answer tonight?
Because I'm gonna look into it.
Okay, but why hasn't it been looked into already?
Denise,
What?
I'm gonna look into it, okay?
So you're telling me nobody has any answers for me tonight?
Ms. Corn, I've asked you to ask these questions ahead of time, provide them in an email format, so we can follow up on it. I don't know what questions you're gonna ask every week when you come here.
There are questions
I'm not
regarding a
intimate,
land deal
but
that I
I'm
should
not,
be able to get
I'm not
answers to.
intimately involved in the ins and outs of the
But your
housing authority.
professionals are.
Excuse me?
Your professionals are.
Okay, so, when you ask a question, Mr. Carlemere, and, you're asking a question to recollect transactions that have taken place. You've asked this body to go back and think about, well, on this particular date, you did this and this. I don't have that information ahead of time. If you ask the questions via email, we can look into it.
And if I could restate your questions properly, Denise, please send that email so that we can answer the specific questions that you want answered. Otherwise, I'm gonna answer the question that I restated to you.
All right, well, I'm
Or
asking.
do you have anything else to add to what you stated earlier without repeating yourself?
Okay, I'm not repeating myself. I'd like to ask public questions in a public meeting to get public answers. I don't think that's.
And I'm trying to give you a public response, but I'm asking you to meet me halfway, as I asked you at the March 22nd meeting, to send emails ahead of time so we can properly research this, so I can provide an answer to you.
Okay, I hate to say this, but do you know how many times I've asked you for something and you've told me you've got to follow up with me and I haven't once
Tell me how many
heard back
times.
from you? Once.
One
Not
time?
once. Not once.
Not once.
Not once.
How many times, so what have you asked before that I've said that I would return the phone call, provide you information? Because I know I've handed you documents here, not in front of everybody, I've walked up to you and provided information to you on more than one occasion.
One time.
More than one
time,
occasion.
and I asked for appraised values on a property and you gave me assessed values on a property. Scribbled on a piece of paper and it was once.
That was the information that was provided me by the tax assessor that I provided to you.
After I asked for an appraised value on a property, and I got assessed values. You told me the property had been appraised.
Did you come back and say, no, I needed something different?
I thought that what you gave me was what I asked for, and I found out it wasn't.
And did you come back and ask me to provide that information to you?
No, because it was months later when I found out it wasn't what I
Okay,
asked
and I
for.
would have provided it to you if it was the incorrect information. Do you have
Okay.
anything else to add to what you stated earlier today?
No.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else? Mr. Heimbaugh? Before you speak,
Yes.
During our workshop, there is, as you can tell, there is no clock.
Yeah, we're taking advantage of that apparently.
And I just ask that people be cognizant that there may be other folks that would like to speak. We do have an agenda, and we will get to the agenda. It's going to run into our 7:30 meeting, but just please keep that in mind. Mr. Heimbaugh.
Pete Heimbaugh, Morningstar Court. So related to this 10-acre parcel, what is the status of this sale from the township back to the Housing Authority? I don't think that was finalized, last I heard.
It was not finalized.
Is it included in the 2021 Gloucester
It
Township
is not
budget?
included in the budget.
Is there any reason it's being held up?
Mr. Carmer is not intimately involved. We have an outside counsel that's working on that project. Do you?
The only thing I know, agreements have not been signed.
Okay.
They're requesting some changes to the redevelopment agreement. The agreement of sale has not been prepared by the attorneys and
Okay.
So it can't be used for this year's budget or?
We are not using it for this year's budget.
Okay, thank you. Also related to the Housing Authority, it was asked in a previous meeting, and it was stated that would look into it, about the viability of the market to affordable program that's being managed by the Housing Authority. Has there been any investigation or consideration of that program?
I do not have an update on that. Is that something, Mr. Carlmer, you could add to?
The only thing I know is just from conversations that the individual that is putting together a market for affordable, supposed to be try to or what he's accomplished, he began in reports to the housing authority for meetings, those meetings, you'll hear what those reports say.
I've opened those reports, attempted to open those reports before and was denied that, so I'll try again. And it is 18 months or something into this program, and all we're talking about is reports still. So it doesn't seem viable. It doesn't seem like a viable program.
I looked at another town's market to affordable, and there was no movement in that other town's program either. It's a difficult program.
Well, then it may not be.
We're the courts on our fair share plan, we address that with courts that the market to affordable, not just this town, throughout the state of New Jersey. It's a difficult program, expensive program. We're trying to present approval by the court when we do not have a market to affordable in this go around, that we're waiting for the courts to open up to approve. The Fair Share Housing Center is an agreement. Market to affordable is being removed as meeting our criteria and is being replaced with other property claims
Yeah.
and this acres at the housing authority. That's all part of it, and that's in there and it replaces that market to affordable.
Yeah, and that was stated before, and I understand that. Doesn't really address the question whether this is a viable program, though. I mean, for 18 months and also into it, spending on consultants and a part-time employee, and we have no.
Not everything
Yeah.
goes according.
So, yeah, so we were going to look into the viability of it, and that's what we're asking. And this is a detailed question, and I may not expect an answer, also related to the Housing Authority. The sale of this 10-acre parcel in 2012, when the Housing Authority received that they sold the properties, they received funds related to the sale. What happened? Where were those funds placed, or where did they go? That's a tough one. That's a tough one to expect an answer to. But Mr. Hutchinson, you were
Right.
Conifer would have an application in the state of New Jersey, your program, that required us to meet various goals, and in the middle of evaluating those goals, the state actually changed the goals, and we could not achieve the height of the qualification that some of the other towns up in northern Jersey did, and therefore we were excluded from being able to participate in that program. But that program involved tax credits, and it would have been a very viable, economically good thing for Gloucester Township.
Now, Pete's question though went to usage of chemicals.
I said, it was the goal.
Okay.
That's the source of the money. The money was deposited then with the Housing Authority. They were the seller.
I don't know what happened after it went to housing.
Yeah, that's more my question, and that's a
Yeah,
tough one to answer.
That's probably a better question for that body.
Yeah. You were liaison at that time, and you wouldn't recall. Right, okay. So also with the Housing Authority, they are also, among these other questions we have and concerns and viability of programs and things like that, they also are delinquent on financial statements and documents and meeting minutes and things like that. So there's some things that need to be cleaned up on there. And now Ms. Grace is our liaison to this authority. I mean, this is, you're saying you want to learn and get on board with what's going on in this town. This is something for you maybe to dive headfirst into and start asking questions or asking for information and find out what's going on. I mean, find out if any of these, we can get answers to any of these questions at the Housing Authority. We're looking toward you to help with that as the liaison. These things have been coming up for a few months now, so it's something you could have been doing already, but doesn't sound like you have been asking questions. Okay, thank you. And just kind of a loose end, the $10 million TAN that was borrowed last year, has that been repaid in March? I didn't see anything, indication of that on the bill list or anything. That wasn't something that went through the bill list?
It's not a wire transfer, Councilman. We should be appearing on bills.
Okay. I don't believe that did. Why would it, $10 million?
Wire transfer took place.
Yeah. There's, okay. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Heimel. Is there anyone else?
Mr. Palmdoro. Thank you, Mrs. Trotter.
Good evening, Council. Ray Polidoro from the Historic Village of Ariel.
Good evening.
I'm going to start off by a request, and I'm going to say this as respectfully as possible. I've been coming to meetings for a lot of years. I've got the ground rules down pretty good for where my camera needs to be. I can appreciate how comfortable you all are, but there's three microphones up there that are not picking up in the back of the room. I can't hear you, the camera can't hear you. I know that it's not up on the $60 webcam yet, but I would appreciate if you spoke into the microphone or turned it up so that the volume is there. If I can't hear it, my camera can't hear it, it's not worthy of what's called a viable public meeting. I'm trying to hear Mr. Colomere. I know that it's difficult. I know you don't speak loud. Maybe if we can get a little closer to that, I would appreciate that. Tom as well, if you wouldn't mind. Mr. Hutchinson's response to a comment was they haven't used it yet. What's the big deal?
I don't know if I said what's the big deal.
It's what I got, the flavor I got off of that. What's the big deal if we haven't done anything with it?
Let's try not to put those words.
Sure enough.
I know other words find their way into my mouth.
And some fly out as well. Well, in any event, the big deal is that if the property's not been used and it doesn't look like there's an intention of being used, what is the reason that a property is going back and forth? I mean, it would be no different than, you're a little short today, I can help you out. Oh no, I'm short, let me get it back to you. It just has that appearance. If the land is not used and it's not such a big deal that the deed restriction has been removed, then why is this property moving back and forth?
Well, it creates the impression out there, and misleading impression, excuse me, when you create the impression that it's been removed, it's not been removed. If it doesn't appear in a subsequent deed, it doesn't mean it's not enforceable. It's still enforceable by the person that put that restriction in there. So that's still there. So when you say there's not an intent to do anything with it, that's not true. The township has always been on top of those 10 acres trying to do something to meet affordable housing, to work with the housing authority for seniors, play around with for veterans. It's been our discussion before the courts, when we were before the judge several times. Fair share housing out of Cherry Hill, we've been working with them. That's just always been part of our discussion of what's happened. There's never been an intent not to use it, so that's
Well,
creating a
may I clarify?
Please, that's creating a misimpression for the public. And when you say it's been removed as a restriction, this township, to my knowledge, and anyone correct me if I'm wrong, it's always been the intent that that property somehow, some way is going to be part of a fair share of housing with seniors or veterans, and we've been trying to jockey it back and forth. And it's being used now to replace the market before.
I guess my better wording would have been in the deed. Does the document still indicate that verbiage?
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
I'm just hearing what's being read.
All right. But what
The
I
original deed it's in the original deed from the county to the housing authority 20-some years ago. And that restriction says if it's being used for something else, they can pull it back. They don't waive that. That restriction is there.
So unless it's going to be used inappropriately,
well, if the original deed had certain verbiage in it, and if also at this time it does not, I have a friend that's an attorney that basically tells me, you bring the documents with you. If you don't have the documents, you don't have the proof. And it's also is the same as a contract. The wording of the verbiage means a lot.
the
And
restriction's still there.
And that is that's the question.
Because it's not in this particular document that we're being told it's not in, doesn't mean the restriction no longer exists.
Well,
exists.
it goes back to the fact that,
Excuse me 1 second.
sure, go ahead.
To show that this council has always intended that when we decided to transfer this back to the housing authority, this governing body as a redevelopment entity established the housing authority as the redevelopment. In that redevelopment agreement, the instruction was they are to be using this property for 2 purposes: veteran senior housing or senior housing. If you read that agreement, that's what it says. So this governing body never abandoned, or this township never abandoned an intent to use it for those purposes. And as
I want that property, Ray, to be used for veteran housing.
Okay.
That's what I want, okay? That's what the redevelopment agreement, I believe, says. So there's nothing wrong with that. If we couldn't utilize it before, but we have the potential to do it now, should we put this property in the hands of the entity that can make that happen now?
Should have done that the first time.
But that, you sound like somebody else who spoke here. Let's talk about today, okay? Today, are you complaining that we're trying to transfer the property back so that it can be used for better housing? Or should we not do it?
Dan,
Yes or no, right?
it's not a yes or no. You're giving me a political bleeding heart story when you look at the amount of money that came from that trust fund and what could that have done for the good of the people that needed that instead of being spent with a piece of property going back and forth. Everything is of what is the intent. Your intent is to do this and to make life better for people. But in the meantime, the trust fund is being sucked dry with money that could have done a lot of good.
We're going to look into that question because Denise brought that up earlier. My question to you, Greg, is should we transfer the property back to the housing authority consistent with the Fair Share Housing Plan so that we can put veteran housing on this property, right? Yes or no?
That should have been done. The
Right.
yes or no should have been done.
Yes or no? Should it be done?
If the property keeps moving, shoulda, coulda,
Put
woulda.
the property back in the hands so that it can be developed for veteran
I
housing.
suppose the Council on the Housing Authority should have figured that out when that property went back and
It's
forth.
so difficult for anybody to answer a question.
It's exactly my point, as Mr. Mercado said, send me an email. That's great. This has been talked about for quite some time. You act like it's a surprise, and this subject matter has not been brought up.
Well, Mr.
It's something
Polidoro-
that,
Mr. Polidoro.
yes, sir.
A specific individual, it's been a subject matter for.
And she asked the questions.
70,000 residents in town, and this specific individual has it, and then her friends jump on and ask the same questions. So, I don't want to back and forth here, ask your questions, make your comments, because
Okay.
we're getting to a back and forth here.
All right, and
But let's be clear. There's one individual that asks questions, and then everyone else jumps on top and asks the questions. As if, and I'm going to piggyback with Mr. Carlmer, that something nefarious is going on. That there's some illegalities here taking place, excuse me. And Mr. Carlmer, correct me if I'm wrong, this type of sale would either have to go to the DCA, has to approve it, or New Jersey Housing Mortgage and Finance, this type of transaction.
If my memory serves me, when the transaction way back 20 years ago, we were required to go through our, then they call it HUD closing, now it's closing disclosure statements. They wanted to know the bottom line dollar and how that money was used. So we reported it. It was a council on affordable housing, say it is not a council. So we have to account to that. And the DCA, Tom can answer this question as to how that money transfers and how it's being utilized.
So if folks believe that there's something illegal taking, just say it. Or there's something nefarious going on, just say it. Instead of going around in a circle and asking all these questions.
I'd be more.
Because the article that Mr. Krug referred to, the reputable news media outlet, that there was an article written about this. And that article, I would imagine, probably did not paint the housing authority in a positive light. These questions here are painting the housing authority not in a positive light. So if you feel that there's something that is illegal, something that's not right, just say it. We'll take a look into it. But the thing is, I'm not spending the entire council meeting, going back and forth about questions that, can be forwarded to us beforehand, and we could take a look into it. And because we don't know when transactions took place, or when this happened, or when this happened, I apologize. This is not something that's on the top of my agenda. When we have a budget, we have other things that, you see our agenda for today, right? The resolutions that we have on. This is not the only decisions that we make on a monthly basis. So, time's yours.
As far as me pointing a finger, making accusations, you
I didn't say you're pointing a finger. I'm
you
saying
can turn that
that
however you like. I'd be more concerned about your diminishing one individual in this town that raised a very good question, because as each person steps up to this microphone, it's one individual. Whether it's a room full of people, 3 of us, 5 of us, or 10 of us, each and every individual represents this township as a resident tax-paying member, as well as a human being.
That individual spoke for 20-plus minutes, okay? And that individual has come here, we listened to it. I've asked this individual, please provide your questions beforehand so we can respond to it.
I think the fact that this same individual and this topic has been around for a lot longer, that it didn't require, today would have been an appropriate time for an answer, being that it's been out there as long as it has, not pushing and kicking the can down the road once again.
And again, if my request that I made on March 22nd to Ms. Coyne to please forward your questions beforehand, we would have an opportunity to respond to that.
All right. I'm going to move on to one other almost similar subject, because I did not hear the answer in the back room, and I stepped up and still had difficulty doing so. At the last meeting, my question was pertaining to, and I did get a reply that we were going to look into it, so I didn't think it required sending an email ahead of time. With what I had described,